The security guard's hand pressed against my chest, stopping me cold at the gleaming entrance of Riverside Corporate Tower. "You don't belong here anymore, Rodriguez," he said, his voice echoing through the marble lobby as dozens of suited executives turned to stare. "But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." My janitorial uniform suddenly felt like a scarlet letter, marking me as the troublemaker who had dared to step out of his place. Behind the glass doors, I could see him, 12-year-old Alex Thompson in his wheelchair, pressing his palms against the window, tears streaming down his face as he watched his hero being cast out forever. 3 months ago, I was just another invisible night janitor mopping floors in this 40-story monument to corporate success. Today, I was the man who had risked everything to save a child, only to discover that sometimes doing what's right costs you everything you can't afford to lose. Daniel Rodriguez had learned to make himself invisible. Every night at 11 p.m. sharp, he badged into Riverside Corporate Tower through the service entrance, pulling on latex gloves as fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the empty corridors. His cart squeaked slightly on the polished marble floors, loaded with industrial cleaners and microfiber cloths that would transform the executive suites back to their pristine condition before the morning rush began. At 34, Daniel moved with the quiet efficiency of a man who understood that his presence was tolerated, not welcomed. The executives who occasionally worked late barely glanced his way when he emptied their trash cans or wiped down their mahogany conference tables. He preferred it that way. Invisibility meant job security, and job security meant his 8-year-old daughter Sophia would have dinner on the table and clean clothes for school. The divorce had been finalized 2 years ago, when Carmen decided that being married to a janitor wasn't the life she'd imagined for herself. She'd moved to Phoenix with her new boyfriend, a real estate agent who drove a BMW and wore Italian shoes. The custody arrangement gave Daniel primary custody, which suited him fine. Sophia was his whole world, the reason he swallowed his pride every night and pushed that squeaky cart through buildings where people earned more in a day than he made in a month. Daniel had been an automotive technician before the plant closed. 15 years of steady work, union benefits, and respect from his colleagues had disappeared overnight when Chrysler moved operations to Mexico. The janitor position at Thompson Industries paid barely above minimum wage, but it came with health insurance that covered Sophia's chronic ear infections and enough flexibility to pick her up from school when needed. The 39th floor was always his last stop. The executive offices were larger here, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and leather furniture that cost more than most people's cars. Michael Thompson's corner office dominated the eastern wall, its walls lined with awards and photographs of the CEO shaking hands with politicians and celebrities. Daniel had been cleaning this office for 8 months, but had never actually met the man whose empire he helped maintain. That changed on a Tuesday night in October, when Daniel discovered he wasn't alone on the 39th floor. The soft whirring sound was almost inaudible, but after months of working in silence, Daniel's ears had become attuned to every subtle noise in the building. He followed the sound down the hallway, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpeting, until he reached the conference room where emergency lighting cast long shadows across the polished table. A boy sat alone in an electric wheelchair, his thin shoulders hunched as he stared out at the city lights below. He couldn't have been more than 12 or 13, with sandy brown hair that needed cutting and clothes that suggested money but not attention to detail. The wheelchair was state-of-the-art, all carbon fiber and sophisticated electronics, but the child in it looked lost and forgotten. Daniel hesitated in the doorway. Company policy was clear about interaction with family members or visitors. His job was to clean, not to engage. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. But something about the boy's posture, the way he sat completely still while the city pulsed with life beyond the windows, made Daniel forget about policy. "Hey there," Daniel said softly, not wanting to startle him. "You okay, buddy?" The boy turned, revealing eyes that were far too old for his young face. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, but there was no hostility in his voice, just a weary acceptance that suggested he'd been abandoned by adults before. "Neither are you, I'm guessing," Daniel replied, stepping into the room. "It's pretty late for someone your age to be hanging around an office building." The boy's name was Alex Thompson, and Daniel learned more about loneliness in the next 20 minutes than he had in years of solitary night shifts. Alex had been paralyzed from the waist down in a skiing accident 18 months earlier, a catastrophe that had turned the Thompson family's world upside down. His mother had struggled with the reality of raising a disabled child and had eventually left, unable to cope with the demands of Alex's care and the guilt of her own limitations. Michael Thompson, consumed by the demands of running a billion-dollar corporation, had hired the best nannies and therapists money could buy, but rarely spent time with his son anymore. "He thinks if he works hard enough, he can fix everything," Alex explained, his fingers tracing patterns on the conference table's polished surface. "Like my legs are just another business problem that needs solving." The boy's voice carried a maturity that broke Daniel's heart. Children shouldn't have to understand that love sometimes came disguised as absence, that parents sometimes retreated when they were needed most. Daniel found himself sitting across from Alex, his cleaning supplies forgotten. "My daughter Sophia is about your age," he said. "Well, she's 8, but she's got this way of making me see things differently when I get too caught up in grown-up problems." He pulled out his phone and showed Alex a picture of Sophia at her school science fair, grinning widely as she stood next to a volcano model that had clearly erupted with more enthusiasm than accuracy. "She looks happy," Alex observed, studying the photo with the careful attention of someone who had learned to read people's faces for clues about their true feelings. "She is happy most of the time," Daniel replied. "Even when things are tough at home, she finds something to smile about. Says it's her job to make sure I don't forget how to laugh." The words felt strange coming out of his mouth. He'd never talked about Sophia with anyone at work, had never allowed his two worlds to intersect. But something about Alex's isolation made Daniel want to share the brightness his daughter brought to his life. Over the following weeks, Daniel began timing his cleaning of the 39th floor to coincide with Alex's late-night visits to the office. The boy was often there when his father worked past midnight, forgotten in the conference room or his father's office, while Michael Thompson fielded calls from overseas markets or reviewed quarterly projections. The nannies weren't allowed in the building after hours, a security policy that left Alex essentially stranded until his father remembered to arrange transportation home. Daniel started bringing extra snacks in his lunch bag, sharing granola bars and juice boxes with Alex while they talked. The boy was brilliant, with a sharp wit and an encyclopedic knowledge of everything from astronomy to classical music. He had been homeschooled since the accident, working with expensive tutors who focused on academic achievement, but seemed to miss the fundamental fact that Alex was desperately lonely. "Do you think I'll ever have friends again?" Alex asked one night, as Daniel organized cleaning supplies nearby. The question came out of nowhere, but Daniel had learned that the boy's most honest moments happened in these quiet spaces between conversations. "What do you mean?" Daniel asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Children could be cruel in their honesty, and a wheelchair made Alex different in ways that 12-year-olds often couldn't navigate gracefully. "Before the accident, I had friends from school, from soccer, from the neighborhood. Now," Alex gestured vaguely at his legs, "the kids from my old school don't know what to say to me. The tutors my dad hires treat me like I'm made of glass, and the physical therapists only care about my muscle development and range of motion." He paused, then added quietly, "Sometimes I think you're the only person who talks to me like I'm still just a kid." Daniel felt something twist in his chest. He thought about Sophia coming home from school with stories about her friends, about playground games and birthday parties and sleepovers. Simple childhood experiences that Alex had been cut off from by circumstance and well-meaning adults who didn't understand that treating him differently was its own form of isolation. "You know what Sophia would say if she met you?" Daniel asked, continuing his work while keeping the conversation light. "She'd probably ask if your wheelchair could do wheelies, and then she'd want to see how fast it could go. She's got no filter when it comes to curiosity, but she's also got no meanness in her. Kids like that still exist, Alex. You just haven't found them yet." The friendship that developed between Daniel and Alex was unlike anything either of them had experienced. For Daniel, it was a chance to be helpful in ways that went beyond emptying trash cans and mopping floors. He found himself looking forward to their conversations, to Alex's questions about everything from how elevators worked to why some people were rich while others struggled to pay rent. The boy's curiosity reminded Daniel of his own daughter's endless stream of why questions, but Alex's inquiries carried the weight of someone genuinely trying to understand the world he'd been thrust back into. For Alex, Daniel represented something he'd lost after the accident, an adult who expected nothing from him except conversation. Daniel didn't treat him like a tragedy or an inspiration or a problem to be solved. He treated Alex like a person whose thoughts and opinions mattered, whose jokes were worth laughing at, whose fears were valid, and whose dreams were still possible. The breakthrough came on a snowy December night, when Alex mentioned that he'd been working on a robotics project with one of his tutors. It's supposed to be a prototype for a device that could help people with limited mobility perform tasks independently, Alex explained, his eyes lighting up with the first genuine enthusiasm Daniel had seen from him. But the tutor keeps wanting to simplify it because he thinks the engineering is too advanced for someone my age. Daniel looked up from the floor he was mopping. What kind of tasks? Well, like reaching things on high shelves or picking up objects from the floor without having to ask for help, Alex said. The basic concept is sound, but the servo motors we're using don't have enough precision and the grip strength isn't calibrated properly. He rolled his wheelchair closer to where Daniel was working. I've been thinking that if we modified the gear ratios and upgraded to a more sophisticated control system. As Alex detailed his ideas, Daniel found himself drawn into the technical discussion. His years as an automotive technician had given him a solid understanding of mechanical systems, and he could see the potential in what Alex was describing. More importantly, he could see how much the project meant to the boy, how it represented a chance to solve problems rather than simply being one. You know, Daniel said thoughtfully, my old shop had some equipment that might work better for what you're trying to do. I still have contacts there. Maybe we could take a look at your project sometime, see if we can make some improvements. Alex's face transformed. For the first time since Daniel had known him, the boy looked like exactly what he was, a 12-year-old excited about building something amazing. Really? You'd help me with it? Of course, Daniel replied, not fully understanding yet how much that simple promise would change both their lives. That's what friends do, right? That night, as Daniel finished his rounds and prepared to head home to Sophia, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months, purpose beyond simple survival. For too long, his life had been about getting through each day, about making ends meet and keeping his daughter fed and clothed and happy. But Alex had reminded him that he had skills and knowledge that could matter to someone, that his value as a person extended beyond his ability to clean offices and collect a paycheck. He had no idea that Michael Thompson had been watching their interactions on the building's security cameras, or that the CEO had been struggling with his own questions about how to connect with his son. Daniel couldn't have predicted that his simple act of friendship would soon collide with corporate policies and family dynamics in ways that would threaten everything he'd worked to build. All he knew was that tomorrow night Alex would be waiting for him with new ideas and infectious enthusiasm, and for the first time in years, Daniel was looking forward to going to work for reasons that had nothing to do with his paycheck. The first time Daniel brought Alex to his apartment, Sophia stared at the wheelchair for exactly 3 seconds before announcing, quote, "That's the coolest chair I've ever seen. Does it have cup holders?" Within minutes, she was peppering Alex with questions about the chair's features, while showing him her collection of painted rocks and explaining her elaborate theory about why cats were probably aliens in disguise. Daniel watched from the kitchen as his daughter effortlessly did what trained professionals had failed to accomplish. She made Alex laugh, not the polite, careful laughter adults often forced around disabled children, but genuine belly laughs that echoed through their small living room. Sophia treated the wheelchair like any other interesting piece of equipment, asking practical questions about its speed and battery life, while remaining completely unimpressed by the expensive technology. "Your daughter is remarkable," Alex told Daniel later, as Sophia demonstrated her ability to balance a spoon on her nose. "She doesn't see my chair first. She just sees me." That evening marked the beginning of a routine that would define the next several months of their lives. After Daniel finished his shift at Thompson Industries, he would drive Alex home to the family's sprawling estate in the hills above Riverside. But increasingly, Alex would ask to stop by Daniel's apartment first, drawn to the warmth and chaos of a home where laughter wasn't scheduled and affection wasn't administered by paid professionals. Sophia appointed herself as Alex's unofficial guide to normal kid stuff. a curriculum that included video games, terrible jokes, and elaborate plans for building blanket forts. She taught him card games and showed him how to braid friendship bracelets, activities that his expensive tutors had never considered part of his education. In return, Alex helped Sophia with her math homework and shared his knowledge of science and history, patient in ways that surprised even Daniel. The robotics project became their shared obsession. Daniel used his connections at his former auto shop to borrow tools and equipment, spending weekends in the garage with Alex and Sophia, all three of them covered in grease, and completely absorbed in the challenge of making Alex's design work. Sophia proved to have an intuitive understanding of mechanical systems, her small fingers perfect for assembling delicate components, while she chattered about improvements and modifications. "We need to call it something," Sophia declared one Saturday as they tested the latest iteration of the device. "All good inventions need names." "How about the Independence Assistant?" Alex suggested. Sophia wrinkled her nose. "That's boring. What about the Grabby McReachface?" Alex burst into laughter. "I love it, but my tutors would probably have heart attacks if I submitted a project called Grabby McReachface." "Then we'll give it a boring name for school and a fun name for us," Sophia decided with the confident logic of an 8-year-old who saw no reason why everything couldn't have multiple identities. As winter turned to spring, Daniel began to notice changes in Alex beyond the obvious improvements in his mood and confidence. The boy was sleeping better, eating more, and engaging with his tutors with renewed energy. The expensive therapists his father had hired remarked on his progress, though none of them understood that the real therapy was happening in a cramped apartment where he was valued for his thoughts rather than his limitations. Daniel also noticed changes in himself. For the first time since his divorce, he was thinking beyond simple survival. Alex's questions about his work had rekindled his interest in mechanical engineering, and he found himself reading technical journals during his lunch breaks, staying current with advances in his field. Sophia's delight in having Alex around had reminded Daniel how much richer life could be when you opened your home to others. The three of them developed traditions that had nothing to do with money or professional achievement. Friday movie nights with homemade popcorn and Sophia's running commentary on plot holes. Saturday morning trips to the farmer's market where Alex would navigate his chair through the crowds, while Sophia collected free samples and Daniel haggled with vendors over prices. Sunday afternoons in the garage, working on projects that ranged from Alex's robotics to Sophia's latest artistic vision. It was during one of these Sunday sessions that Michael Thompson finally discovered where his son had been spending his time. Daniel was under the hood of his aging Honda, trying to diagnose a mysterious rattling sound, while Alex offered suggestions from his wheelchair and Sophia provided unhelpful but enthusiastic commentary. The knock on the garage door interrupted their debate about whether the problem was in the transmission or the exhaust system. Michael Thompson stood in the doorway looking like he'd stepped out of a business magazine, his tailored suit and expensive watch completely out of place in Daniel's cluttered garage. His eyes moved from his son's grease-stained hands to Sophia's paint-covered overalls to Daniel's startled expression, taking in the scene with the analytical gaze that had made him successful in the corporate world. "Alex," Michael said, his voice carefully controlled, "I've been looking for you. Mrs. Henderson said you left with Daniel 3 hours ago." "Dad!" Alex's face lit up with genuine pleasure, though Daniel noticed the boy's posture change slightly, becoming more formal. "You have to see what we've been working on. The servo motor modifications we discussed are actually working now, and Sophia had this amazing idea about the grip sensors." Michael's attention shifted to Daniel, and the warmth in his expression cooled noticeably. "Mr. Rodriguez, isn't it?" "The janitor from my building." The way he said janitor made it clear that Michael Thompson saw Daniel's profession as a complete description of his worth as a human being. Daniel straightened, wiping his hands on a shop rag, acutely aware of the contrast between his work clothes and Michael's perfectly pressed attire. "Yes, sir," Daniel replied evenly. "Alex has been helping Sophia and me with some mechanical projects. He's got a real talent for engineering." "I'm sure he does," Michael said, though his tone suggested polite skepticism rather than genuine interest. "Alex, we need to go. You have a session with Dr. Martinez in an hour, and your mathematics tutor is coming this evening." "But Dad, we're right in the middle of testing the new configuration," Alex protested, gesturing toward the robotic device they'd been working on. Daniel thinks we can improve the response time if we adjust the control algorithms, and Sophia wants to paint racing stripes on it. Your education is more important than playing with toys, Michael said firmly, and Daniel saw Alex's expression shift from enthusiasm to resignation. It's not playing, Sophia interjected with 8-year-old directness. Alex is teaching us about robotics, and we're teaching him about fixing things. That's what friends do. Michael's gaze shifted to Sophia, and Daniel saw a flicker of something softer cross his features before his business mask reasserted itself. I'm sure you're all having fun, he said diplomatically, but Alex has responsibilities that require his attention. As Alex gathered his things, clearly disappointed but unwilling to argue further with his father, Daniel felt a familiar frustration building in his chest. He'd seen this dynamic before, the way wealth could isolate people from genuine connection, the way good intentions could become barriers to the very relationships that might heal old wounds. Mr. Thompson, Daniel said carefully, Alex has made remarkable progress these past few months, not just with the robotics project, but with his confidence, his social skills. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Rodriguez, Michael interrupted, but I think I'm qualified to determine what's best for my son's development. The dismissal was polite, but absolute. Daniel watched as Michael wheeled Alex toward the car, noting how the boy's shoulders slumped with each step they took away from the garage. Sophia slipped her small hand into Daniel's, understanding intuitively that their friend was being taken back to a world where his value was measured by therapeutic achievements rather than the quality of his laughter. That night, after Sophia had gone to bed, Daniel sat in his kitchen staring at the robotics project they'd been working on. Alex's notebook lay open beside it, filled with detailed sketches and calculations that demonstrated a level of creativity and technical understanding that no amount of expensive tutoring could manufacture. The boy had flourished in the chaos of their garage, had found pieces of himself that formal education and professional therapy had failed to reach. Daniel realized he was at a crossroads. He could accept Michael Thompson's implicit message that he should stay in his lane, continue cleaning the man's offices while avoiding any meaningful interaction with his son. It would be the safe choice, the professionally appropriate choice. But it would also mean abandoning Alex to a world of well-meaning isolation, cutting off the friendship that had brought joy and purpose back into all their lives. As he locked up the garage and prepared for another night shift at Thompson Industries, Daniel made a decision that would change everything. He wasn't going to step back. If Michael Thompson wanted to limit his son's world to approved interactions with certified professionals, he would have to do it explicitly. Until then, Daniel would continue to be the friend Alex needed, regardless of corporate hierarchies or social expectations. He had no idea that this decision would soon put him on a collision course with forces far beyond his control, or that his determination to protect Alex would ultimately cost him everything he'd worked to build. The emergency happened on a Tuesday night in April, when the building's elevator system suffered a catastrophic failure that trapped Alex on the 37th floor. Daniel was working 2 floors below when he heard the mechanical grinding followed by an ominous silence that made his blood run cold. The backup generators kicked in immediately, bathing the building in harsh emergency lighting, but the elevators remained motionless. Security protocols dictated that all non-essential personnel evacuate immediately during system failures, but Daniel couldn't forget that Alex was somewhere in the building, likely alone and potentially terrified. He abandoned his cleaning cart and ran for the stairwell, taking the steps 2 at a time as his heart hammered against his ribs. By the time he reached the 37th floor, sweat was pouring down his face, and his lungs burned from the exertion. He found Alex in his father's outer office, his wheelchair positioned near the floor-to-ceiling windows that normally offered a spectacular view of the city, but tonight, with only emergency lighting functioning, the windows reflected Alex's pale face back at him like mirrors. The boy was trying to appear calm, but Daniel could see the fear in his eyes, the way his hands gripped the armrests of his wheelchair. "Hey, buddy," Daniel said, forcing his voice to remain steady despite his own anxiety. "Looks like we've got ourselves a little adventure tonight." Alex turned toward him with visible relief. "Daniel, I thought everyone had left. The elevators just stopped working, and I can't get down the stairs in this chair." His voice cracked slightly on the last words, revealing the panic he was trying to hide. "We'll figure it out." Daniel promised, though he wasn't sure how. The stairwells were designed for foot traffic only, with landings too narrow to accommodate a wheelchair. The freight elevator was part of the same failed system, and even if it had been working, Alex didn't have access to the service areas where it operated. Through the windows, Daniel could see emergency vehicles gathering in the street below, their red and blue lights painting the building's facade in alternating colors. The fire department had responded quickly, but their ladders couldn't reach the 37th floor, and their standard rescue protocols weren't designed for someone in Alex's situation. "My dad's going to be furious," Alex said quietly. "He told me never to come to the office alone after hours. Mrs. Henderson was supposed to drive me home, but she had to leave for a family emergency, and I thought I could just wait in Dad's office until he finished his conference call with Tokyo." Daniel knelt beside the wheelchair so they were at eye level. "Your dad's going to be worried, not angry. There's a big difference." He pulled out his phone and tried calling building security, but the lines were jammed with emergency communications. The cellular towers seemed overwhelmed as well, with calls dropping before they could connect. As the minutes stretched into an hour, Daniel realized that waiting for professional rescue might not be an option. The building's emergency systems were designed to handle standard evacuations, not situations involving disabled individuals who couldn't use the stairs. Alex was becoming increasingly anxious, his breathing shallow and rapid in a way that reminded Daniel of Sophia during her panic attacks. "I need to get you out of here," Daniel said, more to himself than to Alex. He walked to the stairwell door and examined it carefully, measuring the width with his eyes and calculating angles the way he'd learned during his years as an automotive technician. The wheelchair was sophisticated but not particularly heavy, designed with carbon fiber components that prioritized mobility over durability. "What are you thinking?" Alex asked, rolling his chair closer to where Daniel stood. "I'm thinking that sometimes you have to get creative with problem solving," Daniel replied. He was remembering a rescue technique he'd learned during his brief stint as a volunteer firefighter years ago, before Sophia was born, and his life had narrowed to simpler responsibilities. "How much do you weigh, Alex?" "About 90 pounds, maybe 95, with the chair," Alex answered. "Why?" Daniel did quick mental calculations. It would be physically demanding, potentially dangerous, and absolutely against every safety protocol the building had ever established. But the alternative was leaving Alex stranded while emergency services tried to figure out how to extract someone from a height their equipment couldn't reach. "I'm going to carry you down the stairs," Daniel announced. "Both you and the chair." Alex's eyes widened. "That's 37 floors, Daniel. You can't carry me that far." "Watch me," Daniel said with more confidence than he felt. He began by folding down the wheelchair's footrests and adjusting its position for optimal balance. The chair's designers had included several features intended to make transportation easier, though they'd probably never envisioned someone carrying it down 40 flights of stairs. The first few floors were manageable. Daniel cradled Alex in his arms while balancing the folded wheelchair on his back, moving slowly and carefully down each step. Alex was lighter than he'd expected, but the awkward positioning made every movement a careful negotiation with gravity and balance. The emergency lighting cast stark shadows that made depth perception difficult, and the concrete stairs were unforgiving to any misstep. By the 10th floor, Daniel's muscles were screaming in protest. Sweat blurred his vision despite the building's air conditioning, and his back ached from the unnatural position required to manage both Alex and the wheelchair simultaneously. But Alex was talking to him, sharing stories about his robotics project and asking questions about Daniel's work, clearly trying to distract them both from the enormity of what they were attempting. "You know," Alex said as they paused on the 20th floor landing, "when I was in the hospital after my accident, I used to wonder if I'd ever do anything brave again. I thought being paralyzed meant I couldn't be a hero anymore." Daniel adjusted his grip, feeling the strain in every muscle fiber. "Being brave doesn't require working legs, buddy. Some of the bravest people I know have never walked a day in their lives." "But you're the one being brave right now," Alex pointed out. "You could have just left with everyone else. No one would have blamed you." "That's not how friendship works," Daniel replied, starting down the next flight. "Friends don't leave friends behind, especially when they need help most." The final 10 floors were pure determination over physical capability. Daniel's legs trembled with exhaustion, and he had to stop every few steps to rest and readjust his grip. The wheelchair felt like it had doubled in weight, and Alex, despite his efforts to help by holding onto Daniel's shoulders and maintaining balance, was becoming heavier as Daniel's strength waned. When they finally emerged into the lobby, emergency personnel rushed to meet them. Paramedics immediately began checking Alex for injuries while firefighters helped Daniel to a nearby bench, where he sat with his head between his knees, trying to catch his breath and stop the world from spinning. "Sir, that was incredibly dangerous," one of the firefighters told him. "You could have been seriously injured, and you put the child at risk as well." Daniel looked up at the man, his vision still slightly blurred from exhaustion. He was already at risk. At least this way we were facing it together. Across the lobby, he could see Alex talking animatedly to the paramedics, clearly unharmed and excited to share the story of their escape. The boy caught Daniel's eye and grinned, giving him a thumbs up that made every aching muscle worth the effort. That's when Michael Thompson arrived, having been notified by building security about the elevator failure. He took in the scene with the rapid assessment of someone accustomed to managing crises. His son, safe but surrounded by emergency personnel, Daniel slumped on a bench looking like he'd run a marathon, and firefighters discussing protocols that had clearly been improvised rather than followed. "Alex!" Michael rushed to his son's side, his usual composure cracking as relief flooded his features. "Are you hurt? What happened?" "Dad, Daniel saved me," Alex said, his voice bright with excitement and admiration. "The elevator stopped working and I was trapped, but Daniel carried me down 37 flights of stairs. He's my hero." Michael's eyes moved from his son to Daniel, who was still trying to catch his breath on the bench. The firefighter was continuing his lecture about proper emergency procedures, but Daniel wasn't listening. He was watching the reunion between father and son, seeing the genuine fear and love in Michael's expression as he checked Alex for injuries. "Mr. Rodriguez," Michael said, approaching the bench where Daniel sat. His voice was different now, stripped of its usual corporate authority and filled with something raw and grateful. "I don't know how to thank you." Daniel struggled to his feet, his legs still shaky but his resolve firm. "You don't need to thank me, Mr. Thompson. I just did what anyone would do." "No," Michael said firmly, and Daniel could see tears in the businessman's eyes. "What you did was extraordinary. You risked your life for my son." But even as Michael spoke those words, Daniel could see something else in his expression, a calculation happening behind the gratitude. And Daniel realized with growing dread that his decision to break protocol, to take matters into his own hands, was about to have consequences he hadn't anticipated. The corporate world didn't always reward heroism, especially when it came from people who were supposed to follow orders rather than make independent decisions. The termination letter arrived at Daniel's apartment 3 days later, delivered by certified mail with the cold efficiency that only corporate legal departments could master. The language was precise and unforgiving. Violation of safety protocols, unauthorized access to restricted areas during emergency conditions, failure to follow evacuation procedures. There was no mention of Alex, no acknowledgement of the rescue that had made headlines in the local newspaper. Daniel stared at the letter while Sophia ate breakfast, her cheerful chatter about an upcoming field trip providing a stark contrast to the devastation spreading through his chest. 2 weeks, severance pay, and immediate termination of benefits. He calculated quickly in his head. Enough money to cover rent for 1 month, maybe groceries for 2 weeks if he was careful. After that, nothing. "Daddy, are you okay?" Sophia asked, noticing his silence. "You look sad." "Just thinking about work stuff, princess," Daniel replied, folding the letter and forcing a smile. "Nothing for you to worry about." But everything was something to worry about now. Without the janitorial position, Daniel had no steady income and no health insurance for Sophia. His savings account held exactly $237, barely enough to cover utilities for the month. The job market for former automotive technicians was still brutal, and his employment gap would be difficult to explain to potential employers. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd saved Michael Thompson's son and lost everything in the process. The corporate machine had ground forward with mechanical precision, protecting itself from liability by eliminating the variable that had acted outside approved parameters. It didn't matter that his actions had been heroic. What mattered was that they'd been unauthorized. Daniel spent the next week applying for every position he could find: retail clerks, warehouse workers, delivery drivers, anything that might provide immediate income. But most employers wanted references from recent jobs, and he couldn't exactly list Thompson Industries given the circumstances of his departure. The few interviews he managed to secure ended quickly once potential employers learned about his termination for policy violations. Sophia began to notice the changes in their routine. Daniel stopped ordering pizza on Friday nights and started making more meals from rice and beans. He canceled her swimming lessons and told her they'd have to skip the movies until Daddy's work situation improved. She accepted these explanations with the resilience of childhood, but Daniel could see the questions forming in her eyes. 2 weeks after his termination, Daniel was delivering resumes in person to restaurants and retail stores when his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice was immediately recognizable. "Mr. Rodriguez, this is Michael Thompson. Could you meet me for coffee this afternoon? I have something I'd like to discuss with you." Daniel's first instinct was to decline. The last thing he needed was another reminder of how his attempt to help had destroyed his life. But curiosity won over pride, and he agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown, far from the corporate towers where his former life had unraveled. Michael was waiting in a corner booth when Daniel arrived, looking uncomfortable in casual clothes that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly rent. The billionaire stood when Daniel approached, extending his hand in a gesture that seemed more personal than professional. "Thank you for coming," Michael said, and Daniel was struck by how different he sounded away from his corporate environment. More human somehow. Less certain of his authority over every situation. They ordered coffee, and Michael spent several minutes studying Daniel's face before speaking. "I want you to know that I had nothing to do with your termination," he said finally. "Building security and legal made that decision while I was dealing with Alex's medical evaluations. By the time I learned what they'd done, the paperwork had already been processed." Daniel nodded, unsurprised. He'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed didn't make his situation any less desperate. "I understand. Companies have to protect themselves." "That's exactly the problem," Michael said, his voice carrying an edge of frustration. "My company protected itself by punishing the man who saved my son's life. Alex hasn't stopped talking about that night. He tells everyone who'll listen that you're his hero, that you risked everything to help him when no one else could." "I just did what felt right," Daniel replied. "Any parent would have done the same thing." "No, they wouldn't have," Michael said firmly. "Most people would have followed protocol, waited for professional rescue services, covered themselves legally. You chose differently, and my son is safe because of that choice." He paused, then added quietly, "Alex has been asking when he can see you again." I'd been struggling with how to answer him. Daniel felt the familiar ache of loss. He missed Alex's enthusiasm and Sophia's joy when their friend visited, but more than that, he missed the sense of purpose he'd found in helping the boy discover his own potential. "I can't offer you your janitorial position back," Michael continued. "The legal department would have a collective heart attack, and it would create precedent issues for future policy violations." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "But I can offer you something better." Daniel looked at the card. Thompson Engineering Solutions, with his own name printed below the title, Senior Mechanical Consultant. "It's a subsidiary I'm launching," Michael explained, "focused on developing assistive technologies for people with disabilities. Alex's robotics project convinced me there's a real market for innovative solutions in that space." He smiled slightly. "He insisted that you be the head of mechanical design. Apparently, you're the only person who understands both engineering principles and what it means to actually help people." Daniel stared at the card, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "Mr. Thompson, I don't have a college degree. I haven't worked as an engineer in years." "You have something more valuable than credentials," Michael replied. "You have judgment. You know when to follow rules and when to break them for the right reasons. That's not something you can teach in business school." The salary Michael outlined was more than Daniel had ever dreamed of earning. Health insurance for Sophia, a retirement plan, even education benefits if he wanted to complete his engineering degree. But more than the financial security, it was the chance to work on projects that mattered, to use his skills in ways that would genuinely improve people's lives. "There's one condition," Michael added with a slight smile. "Alex will be heavily involved in the product development process. He's got more insights into what people with disabilities actually need than any focus group could provide. I hope you're prepared to work with a very demanding 12-year-old consultant." That evening, Daniel sat in his kitchen with Sophia, trying to explain the miraculous turn their lives had taken. She listened with the serious attention she reserved for important adult conversations, asking thoughtful questions about his new job and whether this meant Alex could visit again. "So losing your old job was actually a good thing?" she asked, working through the logic with characteristic directness. "Sometimes bad things happen that lead to better things," Daniel replied. "But you can't count on that. You still have to do what's right, even when it might cost you something important." Sophia nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Does this mean we can get pizza again on Fridays?" Daniel laughed, pulling her into a hug. "Princess, we can get pizza whenever you want." 6 months later, Thompson Engineering Solutions launched its first product, an advanced assistive device that Alex had christened Grabby McReachface in the official patent documentation. Despite the legal department's horrified objections, Daniel stood in the company's new offices, watching through the conference room window as Alex demonstrated the device to a group of potential investors, his confidence and enthusiasm filling the room. Sophia pressed against the glass beside him, grinning as she watched their friend command the attention of adults who hung on his every word. "He's not just smart," she observed. "He's happy smart." Daniel nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Sometimes the most important thing you could do for someone was believe in them when they'd forgotten how to believe in themselves. Sometimes being a hero meant nothing more complicated than showing up, paying attention, and refusing to walk away when things got difficult. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, saving someone else's life ended up saving your own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.